What if I told you that a single moment of desperation has thrown Malawi's entire electoral process into chaos? The Malawi Electoral Commission has confirmed the arrest of a returning officer after a shocking failed suicide attempt. But here's the twist. Why did this officer try to take his own life? Was it just personal pressure, or does it reveal something much deeper about electoral corruption and political power struggles in Africa? Stay tuned, because what started as a tragic incident may actually expose a hidden crisis shaking the very foundations of democracy in Malawi and beyond. The Malawi Electoral Commission has confirmed the arrest of a returning officer after a failed suicide attempt. This shocking development has sparked fresh questions about the integrity of elections in Malawi and the wider state of democracy in Africa. What pushed the officer to such an extreme step? Was it fear of exposure, political pressure, or something more sinister? In this video, we break down what really happened during the suicide attempt, why the Malawi Electoral Commission is under fire, how this scandal could affect Malawi's politics, and what lessons Zambia and other African nations must draw. Watch till the end, because this is not just a Malawi story. It's a warning for Africa. The fall of an officer on a quiet day in Lilongwe, Malawi's capital, a scene unfolded that would leave the nation shaken. An election officer, a man sworn to protect democracy, was found on the edge of life and death after a shocking suicide attempt. The news spread like wildfire. But what the public didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a much darker story. Who was this man? To many, he was simply another official in a system most Malawians rarely think about. But within the walls of Malawi's Electoral Commission, he carried secrets about ballots, power, and the fragile machinery of democracy itself. And when those secrets became too heavy to bear, something snapped. His attempt to end it all was not met with sympathy, as one might expect. Instead, it was met with handcuffs. Police swiftly arrested him, raising even more questions. Why arrest a man who had just tried to take his own life? Was he guilty of something the public didn't know? Or was he being silenced before he could speak? As images of his arrest began to circulate, Malawians were divided. Some saw a corrupt officer caught in his own trap. Others saw a broken man being crushed by a system too powerful to resist. And in the background, whispers grew louder. If this was happening to one election officer, what did it say about the state of Malawi's democracy? This first episode is not just about one man's fall. It is about the weight of responsibility carried by those who count the votes, certify the results, and declare the winners. It is about the unseen battles fought in quiet offices where democracy can be safeguarded or stolen without the public ever knowing. The officer's fall has forced Malawi to ask hard questions. And as Africa watches, many wonder, was this simply a tragedy or the first sign of something far more dangerous hidden within Malawi's electoral system? The fall of an officer on a quiet day in Lilongwe, Malawi's capital, a scene unfolded that would leave the nation shaken. An election officer, a man sworn to protect democracy, was found on the edge of life and death after a shocking suicide attempt. The news spread like wildfire. But what the public didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a much darker story. Who was this man? To many, he was simply another official in a system most Malawians rarely think about. But within the walls of Malawi's Electoral Commission, he carried secrets about ballots, power, and the fragile machinery of democracy itself. And when those secrets became too heavy to bear, something snapped. His attempt to end it all was not met with sympathy, as one might expect. Instead, it was met with handcuffs. Police swiftly arrested him, raising even more questions. Why arrest a man who had just tried to take his own life? Was he guilty of something the public didn't know? Or was he being silenced before he could speak? As images of his arrest began to circulate, Malawians were divided. Some saw a corrupt officer caught in his own trap. Others saw a broken man being crushed by a system too powerful to resist. And in the background, whispers grew louder. If this was happening to one election officer, what did it say about the state of Malawi's democracy? This first episode is not just about one man's fall. It is about the weight of responsibility carried by those who count the votes, certify the results, and declare the winners. It is about the unseen battles fought in quiet offices where democracy can be safeguarded or stolen without the public ever knowing. The officer's fall has forced Malawi to ask hard questions. And as Africa watches, many wonder, was this simply a tragedy or the first sign of something far more dangerous hidden within Malawi's electoral system? Shadows over the ballot elections are supposed to be moments of clarity when the people speak and the results reflect their will. But in Malawi, As in many parts of Africa, elections are often shrouded in suspicion. And behind the suicide attempt of one election officer, many believe there were shadows over the ballot itself. For months leading up to the crisis, whispers circulated in Lilongwe's corridors of power. Allegations of tampered ballot boxes, missing tally sheets, delays that seemed too convenient to be mere accidents. To ordinary Malawians, these were just rumors. But to those inside the system, like the officer at the heart of our story, the whispers carried weight. Every election has winners and losers. But in Malawi's fragile democracy, the stakes are more than political, they are existential. Losing an election can mean losing access to resources, contracts, or even personal safety. It is in this high-stakes arena that election officers often find themselves trapped, pressured by forces far beyond their control. Some insiders claim that during the last elections, external hands try to influence results, businessmen, party officials, even foreign actors. Others suggest that corruption within the commission itself created openings for fraud. What is certain is that the officer we now see in headlines lived through this storm. And perhaps he carried knowledge of what really took place behind closed doors. When his suicide attempt made news, many connected it not to personal despair, but to political pressure. Had he seen too much? Had he been asked to do something that haunted him? Or was he caught between loyalty to the system and loyalty to the truth? For the people of Malawi, this is not just about one man. It is about the sanctity of the ballot. Every voter who lined up for hours to cast a ballot now wonders, did my vote count, or was it swallowed by the shadows? As we peel back the layers, the tragedy of one officer begins to reveal the deeper tragedy of a system where democracy itself may be slipping into darkness. The arrest nobody expected in most countries. When someone attempts to take their own life, the reaction is one of compassion. Doctors step in. Counselors are called. Families gather in support. But in Malawi, the story of the election officer took a startling turn. Instead of being taken to a hospital bed for recovery, he was placed in handcuffs. The image shocked the nation, a fragile man, barely recovered from a suicide attempt, being escorted by police as though he were a dangerous criminal. To many Malawians, it was not just unusual, it was unthinkable. Why would the state treat him as a suspect rather than a victim? Officials were quick to justify the move. They claimed that his actions were linked to misconduct, that there were irregularities tied to his work as an election officer, and that he could not be allowed to walk free. But the explanation only deepened the mystery. Was this about accountability, or was it about silencing a man who might have known too much? For critics, the arrest was a red flag. It suggested that the government was less concerned with his well-being and more concerned with control. After all, a man in despair is unpredictable. He might speak. He might confess. He might expose truths that powerful actors would prefer to keep hidden. Supporters of the government, however, argued differently. They said no one, not even an election officer, should be above the law. If he was involved in electoral misconduct, then his personal struggles could not excuse him. Justice, they insisted, had to take its course. The arrest became more than a legal matter. It became a symbol. For some, it represented the cold hand of a state that would rather punish than listen. For others, it represented the strength of a system unwilling to bend, even for its own officers. But one thing was clear, the officer's suicide attempt was no longer just a personal tragedy. It had become a political drama with the power to shake Malawi's fragile democracy to its core. The president's dilemma at the heart of every national crisis lies a single question: what will the president do? In Malawi, as the scandal of the arrested election officer unfolds, all eyes turn to one man, President Lazarus Chakwera. For Chakwera, the dilemma is sharp. On one hand, he rose to power as a reformer, promising to clean up corruption and restore trust in Malawi's fragile democracy. On the other, his government now stands accused of silencing an officer whose only crime may have been knowing too much. In the days following the officer's arrest, pressure mounted. Opposition parties accused the government of abusing power. Civil society groups demanded transparency. International observers began to whisper about Malawi's democratic backsliding. And through it all, President Chakwera remained silent, at least in public. But silence itself became a statement. Was the president carefully considering his next move, or was he allowing events to unfold because they serve his political interests? Supporters argue that Chakwera's hands are tied. The Electoral Commission is meant to be independent, and any interference from State House would be seen as political meddling. They say his restraint proves his respect for democratic institutions. Critics see it differently. They argue that leadership requires action, that by standing back, Chikwera is allowing a climate of fear to take root. Worse, they suspect that the silence masks complicity, that the officer's arrest may have been ordered or at least condoned by those close to power. For Chikwera, the stakes are immense. If he intervenes, he risks undermining the independence of the very institutions he vowed to protect. If he does nothing, he risks being remembered not as the reformer who saved Malawi's democracy, but as the leader who watched it unravel. In this moment, the president's dilemma is not just political, it is existential. It is about whether Malawi can believe in the promises of its leaders, or whether those promises vanish the moment they are tested. Whispers of a larger plot in Malawi's political history, scandals rarely stay small. What begins as a personal tragedy often grows into whispers of conspiracy, and the case of the arrested election officer is no exception. Across Lilongwe, in cafes, markets, and political circles, one question echoes: was his suicide attempt truly his own, or part of a much larger plot? Some Malawians believe he was a whistleblower, a man who carried secrets about rigged ballots, pressured commissioners, and hidden deals. In this version of events, his life became unbearable not because of guilt, but because of fear. Fear of exposure. Fear of what might happen if he spoke out. Others see a different picture. They suggest he was no victim, but a pawn caught in a factional war within Malawi's ruling elite. Perhaps his downfall was orchestrated, a warning to others inside the electoral system: obey or be destroyed. Then there are those who point beyond Malawi's borders. Could foreign powers have had a hand in this? Elections are not just local contests anymore. They shape trade, security, and alliances. Some argue that outside actors, eager to sway Malawi's future, may have played a hidden role in fueling the crisis. The government, of course, denies it all. Officials dismiss the theories as baseless speculation, calling the officer's story one of personal weakness, not political intrigue. But the timing, the secrecy, and the swiftness of his arrest suggest otherwise to a public already distrustful of authority. And so, Malawi is left with unanswered questions. If it was only a personal tragedy, why the heavy-handed response? If there was no plot, why so many whispers of one? This is the danger of silence in fragile democracies. When leaders fail to explain, people begin to invent. And in those inventions, truth and rumor blur until they become indistinguishable. In the case of Malawi's election officer, what began as one man's despair now threatens to expose or create a plot that could destabilize the entire nation. Africa watches in silence. Malawi's crisis has not gone unnoticed. Across the continent, from Lusaka to Pretoria, leaders, journalists, and ordinary citizens have followed the story of the election officer with a mix of shock and quiet recognition. Because while the names and places may differ, the themes feel painfully familiar. Africa is no stranger to troubled elections. From disputed results in Kenya and Zimbabwe to ballot controversies in Nigeria and Zambia, the integrity of the vote has too often been called into question. Malawi's story, dramatic as it is, fits into a larger pattern, one that makes many governments uncomfortable. Yet the silence is striking. Few African leaders have spoken publicly about the scandal. Regional bodies like the Southern African Development Community have been careful, offering generic statements about stability, but avoiding direct criticism. It is as if the continent is watching a mirror it would rather not look into. For ordinary Africans, however, the story hits harder. Social media has become a forum of unfiltered debate. Zambians ask whether their own election officials face similar pressures. South Africans wonder if party politics could drive their officers to the same despair. Nigerians recall the chaos of past elections and see Malawi as proof that the wounds of democracy remain open. The officer's story has thus become more than a Malawian tragedy. It has become a continental warning. If one man's collapse reveals cracks in the system, what might happen when entire nations face the same pressures? The silence of Africa's leaders speaks volumes. It reflects a fear that Malawi's scandal could easily become their own, that what happened in Lilongwe today might happen in their capitals tomorrow. But silence cannot erase the truth. Across Africa, people are connecting the dots, recognizing the shared struggles of fragile democracies. And as they do, a bigger question arises. If the continent continues to watch in silence, who will speak for the integrity of Africa's vote? The cost of truth in every democracy. Truth is the most fragile currency. It can empower nations, or it can destroy them. In Malawi, the truth surrounding one election officer now hangs like a sword over the entire system. And the cost of uncovering it may be higher than the nation is willing to pay. Who was this man in the end? Was he a corrupt official, caught and consumed by guilt? Was he a whistleblower, silenced before he could reveal the secrets of the ballot box? Or was he simply a human being, broken under the weight of impossible expectations? The government insists the story is straightforward, a personal matter, unrelated to politics. But the people are not convinced. Too many questions remain unanswered. Too many signs suggest that behind his fall lies something far more dangerous, a system willing to sacrifice individuals to protect itself. For the officer, the cost of truth was personal. His life, his dignity, his freedom, all stripped away in the aftermath of his collapse. For Malawi, the cost may be even greater. Trust in elections, once fragile, now hangs by a thread. Citizens begin to wonder whether their votes matter at all, or whether the outcome is decided long before ballots are cast. And for Africa, the lesson is sobering. Malawi's tragedy is not an isolated event, but part of a wider struggle. From one country to another, the question remains: how much are leaders willing to pay to preserve power, and how much are citizens willing to endure to uncover the truth? Truth demands courage. It demands transparency, accountability, and sacrifice. But in fragile democracies, truth often comes at a price too high for those in power, and too heavy for ordinary people to bear. As Malawi closes this painful chapter, one haunting question remains: in the battle between power and truth, who will win? And what will the cost be for a continent still searching for the true meaning of democracy?